Today we're working on a cloud and seascape scene. If you're new to painting wet and wet technique, I recommend that you tape your paper down to your table or a board so that it won't warp too much as you're painting. In this case, I have my paper stretched, so I don't need to do that. I'm primarily going to work with a sky that is somewhat, it's a blue sky, more of a blue sky, a little more color, but I'll have clouds in there that are wispy clouds. So to start with, I'll be using, here's my palette. I'll be using ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, a little bit of manganese blue, viridian green, and probably some hooker's green. And then for the sand, I'll be using yellow ochre and burnt sienna. I usually put in pen and ink, I put some initials here to say what the paint is I'm using. So those are my primary, the colors I'll primarily be using. If I have time, I may end up with some of the violet here, and let's see, which one is that? That's the dioxazine violet or whatever it's called. So here's the way it looks. I've arranged my colors sort of like the color wheel. And I'll start with just a quick sketch. Oh dear, got to get my pencil, just a minute. Here's one. And my handy eraser. And the scene is of Goleta Beach, where I went on Tuesday with my other class. And so my plan is to do the bluff, a little bit of the bluff with some trees. I don't know if you can see because I'm not pressing real hard. The bluff is very white. And then well, I was going to make more of the, actually more of the sky, wasn't I? Well, too late now. Well, maybe I should though, because of the fact that we don't have very much time. So I'm going to lower this a little. So I'll make my horizon line down here. I'm just eyeballing it right now, but I am going to check and make sure that I have it right. And there's vegetation on the bluffs, so I'm just giving sort of an outline of where things will be, a guideline. And then there are some white tree trunks and branches in the trees over here. Now I'll put in an indication of the water here. I've got to get kind of the curvature that you see when the water's coming in and out. And then there's this where the water comes in, kind of like the slough area. Now, I wish I had looked for that painting that I showed you, but I just have a digital version of it. Let's see if I can open that, though it'll be helpful to have. Okay, so I can see what I did here that I wanted to be able to show you. All right, so to start with, I need to make sure that I have enough.
Sylvia, could you point to where your horizon is?
Oh yeah, it's right here.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to measure now and see if I have it the same on both sides. I could actually use some tape, you know, but I just want to make sure I have it the same on both sides. So I'm looking at where I have it right here on the edge and then over here. Okay, looks pretty good. Okay, I think that, you know, I did pretty well eyeballing it. My favorite perspective is what I call eyeball perspective.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that instead of, you know, doing the whole thing where I do all the diagram of, you know, where the vanishing point is, where everything is, I just sort of like judge with my eye where things go. And it's usually pretty accurate, actually. It's amazing when you build up that skill. Okay, so now I'm going to paint the sky, and I'll be using a couple of big brushes. Have a big flat and a big round. I'm going to add water with my big flat. And I think I will, I'll leave some dry places on here. I'm going to paint down into the trees because I want some of the blue to show through. I want some gaps. Okay, now with my round brush, for the sky, I'm going to use cobalt blue. Because I'm using more color here, I'm not going to do quite as gray a sky as I did on my one this morning or yet a Tuesday. But I'll put a few other clouds in there too, so. Okay.
People were asking about color earlier. I thought I'd mention Jane Blundell, because she talks a lot about palettes on her website,
Okay.
colors.
Watercolor painter.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tim has mentioned her before too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Talks about, she talks a lot about pigments, various pigments.
Uh-huh.
Could you say that name one more time, please?
It's Jane Blundell, B as in boy, Lundell. And it's janeblundellart.com.
Now I'm going to add a little yellow ochre in the sky down toward the horizon.
It's good country.
Yeah, it's pretty.
And while it's still wet, I'm coming back in with a little bit more color. Pigment, I should say. And I could, just for a little drama, mix a little bit of burnt sienna with ultramarine blue. Put a little bit of a bluish gray in there. Maybe up here on the top corner, the left. Add a little bit of a more of a gray.
That adds some nice drama.
Yeah, a little drama is okay, but I've had too much this week. Now remember, you can, if you didn't leave enough white and you feel like you need more clouds, you can use Kleenex. Just use a Kleenex to lift a little bit of the color for cloud. And a little more blue in here.
Well,
Okay. And now down here toward the horizon, I'm going to add a little bit more. Sort of like there's a, you know, some distant clouds. It's starting to bleed down into my water, so I'm just going to mop it up with my paper towel. Soften my edge where I painted blue.
All right then.
That's yours.
Carve.
See, somebody's talking. There.
Was that yellow ochre you put towards the horizon?
Yes, it was yellow ochre.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now what I want to paint some of the, it's a little too wet for me to paint some of my hills in the distance, I think, slightly too wet. I'll blot it a little bit more because I do want to paint it soon since I don't have a lot of time, but I'll go ahead and start with some of the sand because that is something that I can do. It hasn't got anything wet next to it. So I have yellow ochre here. And I'm going to use a little burnt sienna too. Right in the foreground area. And because there's some wet sand, I'm adding a little of the violet over here to the edge of the water. A little bit more burnt sienna. And a little bit of cobalt blue or ultramarine blue too with the violet. Whoops, I got way too much on there. Now I'm going to sprinkle some salt on that. Because in the foreground, I want some texture. Got some more coarse salt and some fine salt. So just a little bit of the coarse, mostly the finer table salt. Okay, now I think I can paint some of these hills in the distance. So I'm looking at, I want something that fades back, so I'm going to use a little bit of a ultramarine blue. But I want it to be a slight green too, so I'm going to add a little bit of viridian to it. And it's bleeding a little bit. I don't know if you can see how it's bleeding up a little bit, but that's okay because I want the soft edge. Okay, and let's see. So now I can work a little bit on the green of the vegetation. I'm looking at where I have edges that are not wet.
Is that distant trees with the blue and viridian, ultramarine?
Yeah, it's the distant peninsula, actually.
Okay.
So I'm adding some Hooker's green and ultramarine blue.
It has a look of our classic fog down in the lower sky.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, a little sap green because I want warmer greens in the foreground. And now a little bit of cat orange because I see in some of the areas that are green, there's some orangey tones. And a little more, adding some blue to my green now. Little too much, actually. And because I want this little point that sticks out to stand out, I'm mixing a yellow green for it. Okay, let's see here. Now I can paint some of the trees that are a little bit closer. You know, I'm running out of time, you guys. I think I'm not going to be able to do much more if we do the voice thread.
I vote for keep painting. What does other people think?
I did make comments.
Yes,
Voice
I
thread.
vote for that too. Also, how did you darken the green if I've only got Viridian?
If you darken, you can darken it with an ultramarine blue or what, you know, something that's, or you can make it even with some burnt sienna. It'll change the color temperature a little bit.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
If you only have Viridian, you could mix a green with ultramarine blue and yellow.
Mm. Right, thank you.
Sure.
Sylvia, what was the title in VoiceThread for this week's uploads?
Week 1 outdoor sketching review.
It's so weird because it just doesn't show on my page.
Well, it could be that I don't have your email right on there. I think you had a couple emails. I might have the wrong one. on
Yeah,
there.
I don't use a City College one anymore. They changed my email.
Well, I was trying to be conscious of that, you know, and not do that. So if I did that, I'll be surprised, but I wouldn't put anything past myself
Oh,
right now.
oh, I'm sorry.
I know it won't be that, stay that way, you know.
Well, the world's so crazy. I think most of us are kind of cuckoo too.
Isn't it? I mean, is it going to be this way for the rest of our lives?
I'm afraid, that's a great question, and you're not the only one that's asked it.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the good things about you, Sylvia, is being a cat fancier,
Yeah.
having us around is like herding cats.
Oh, what a point.
So, but I also think it equips you for all the things that are being thrown at us in the world today too.
There is one other thing I haven't mentioned to you that I just got an email about, and that is that I'm supposed to evaluate each one of you at the end of the term with how you did with the student learning objectives. They're called SLOs.
Ugh.
And 50 people, there's no way. So what I'm going to do is I'll compile a list of questions and ask you how you did or feel you did. I mean, it's not a grade really, it's pass or fail.
That's a great idea.
But I can't do it, you know. I'm thinking of telling, well, you don't pay me enough to do that. And then I go,
Sylvia, we had to do it all the time when I was full-time faculty. We had to do it for the last few years. And
yeah,
most people just did the same thing for everything. They just did it, you know? It's like, unless there was something outstanding that showed that someone was awful or wasn't coming or something, they just basically didn't spend a lot of time doing individual whatever.
I understand that, but you know, I've also taught at universities. where I
Yeah,
had to do that, and I would rather have something that would be honest, like, you know,
personal.
first do it yourself, then you can take a look and think about how you did it, and maybe it'll give you also incentive to do more as you're working on things in taking class. And so,
I think that's a brilliant idea.
yeah, and I have to thank Martha for, I was thinking it anyway, and then Martha validated what I was thinking and said that that's, you know, what I should probably do. I think that I like the idea. Okay, so now I haven't painted the water yet. I'm gonna hold off on that. Paint the top part here of the trees. So I need to get a darker color. I'm looking though at the one I painted, and I actually didn't go that dark with the ones that I painted on the painting that you all liked. So I'm going to add a little burnt sienna to my green because I don't want it to be too bright. And I'm going to paint these trees in the foreground. And I'm doing sort of a dabbing technique. So because, you know, at the ends of the branches, the leaves aren't big clumps usually. And I have not used any Frisket on the trunks. I'm going to try scratching out. I'm going to put in, you know, a few other colors in here too, because it's like an autumn thing where the trees are changing color.
Sylvia,
Yeah.
this is Linda Sterling. I just wanted to mention, I don't know if people saw this, the Maritime Museum's having a watercolor exhibit pop-up this Saturday from 11 to 5 of Sea and Land with Kelly Kloss, who's a local artist, watercolor artist, and her work's beautiful.
Oh, okay.
Just outside on the front patio of the Maritime Museum. So I'm just mentioning that if anyone's interested.
Thanks, Linda.
Sure, her work's beautiful because she does all ocean stuff too, since you're painting the beach.
And she does Goleta Beach, right?
Yeah, well, she does all kinds of things. She does a lot of sea life. It's watercolors of sea and land. It's from 11 to 5 in front of the Maritime Museum out on the patio.
Okay.
The scape artists also have an online exhibit, and
Yes,
it's pretty amazing.
yes, that's also going on now through the Maritime Museum. So.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm looking at the bluffs and how they sort of overlap one another. So I need to create some distinction between them. Okay. This is very watered down, some of the greens I've been using. And I want to paint some of the bluffs, and so I'm getting some yellow ochre and a little burnt sienna. And then I'm going to, first I'll wet a little bit of the bluff because I want it to run a little bit. And then I want it to get cooler as it goes back in the distance, so. And then there's a gray, kind of a, almost like a purpley kind of a gray, where there's the, a lot of dead tree limbs and so forth in this area. And maybe it's even some of the dirt, you know, showing through. So I'll put a little bit of a, maybe umber in there. And down at the bottom of the bluff, going to put in some of the wood, the logs that have rolled in or whatever's there. I don't see it so much in the photo that I'm sharing with you, but I'm putting it in anyway.
What color is that?
It's a little bit of Prussian blue, I think, with some of burnt sienna. There might be some rocks and things up in there. It's just to help to give a definition to that edge. Now I'm going to see if I can scrape back into what I painted for the tree trunks. So I've got my angled brush. And I'm going to try to scrape. Whoops, I'm getting darker lines, which means I think it might still be too wet. There's some that's making lighter lines. Whoops. So that means I'll have to end up probably using gouache. That's okay. Some darker branches are okay too. Now I think I better paint the water just because time is running out. So I'll go with a little bit of ultramarine and add a little viridian to it. Let's see. And a tiny bit of burnt sienna because I don't want it to be too bright. You can use tape if you want to. I'm not using tape. I'm just eyeballing it. I'm leaving a little white edge in front of the faraway peninsula. Now I'm going to get, I think I'll get a little bit of the Prussian blue. Prussian blue is kind of a blue-green. I'm going to use my bigger brush.
You painting on dry?
Yes. And where it comes into, the water comes into this, whoops, that's really bright, comes into this estuary. It also starts to get even darker in here. But part of it is kind of a brownish tone because of the sand underneath it. So I'm adding some of the brown. It's also all like it's a reflection in some ways of the trees and what's on the bluff above it.
That's really pretty, Sylvia.
Thank you. Now up here, where it gets close to, it's the wet sand. I've got the wet sand here. if I squint my eyes and look at the photo, I see that it's lighter in this area, but there's still a little bit of this color, kind of a purpley color in places in that wet sand area too. So this is a tricky part. It's like, how do you make it look like it's water, but also, you know, over sand? So you want to add a little of the color of the water, as well as a little bit of the purpley wet sand look. Okay, so I still have to deal with the trees, more darks in my trees. All right. Few darks up in here. Now, some of the details of, you know, how there's shadows on the cliffs. And let's do a little spatter. I didn't put the kelp on the beach, but I'm going to mix up some sort of like a spattery kind of thing. And I need to protect my painting, so we'll do what she said about putting a paper towel over it. you know, when you get big blobs you don't want, just pick up some of them with your paper towel. And then over on this side, I have to do something with this area. It's a little bit too smooth. Now I have to add, because I made it warmer over there, I've got to make it a little warmer over here. Now I'm glazing some of this brownish tone over this edge of the water. Now I'm going to get my white gouache. I'll just get some out of the tube. Some of this paint isn't completely dry yet, so it's not standing out as much as it would if it were. And then I need to delineate a little bit more of the water, the edge of the water, because it didn't save enough of it. So this is where actually I think the white ink might be good. Let me get the white ink. the black. I have the white ink here, but I don't see it. That's what I would suggest using. What you need to do is get something that's very opaque and white and put that along the edge of the water here. So because I don't see it, I'll just paint it. And you can make, make it look like there's a little bit of rougher water here in the foreground. Put a few little rocks in the water here. Or maybe there might be, kelp or something in here. I could stand to put in for a few more darks here and there. As you all know, I love to do that. But I'm running out of time, so I would put them in places where I could make some of the layers stand out more. Any questions?
It's gorgeous, just gorgeous.
Well, I'm glad you like it. I'm pretty happy with it.
It's gorgeous. It really, really is.
I'm so impressed.
So does it inspire you to paint?
It is inspirational.
That's
It's
great.
a wonderful painting, Sylvia.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
Even with all of our requests.
Yeah, well,
Beautiful.
that's part of teaching, isn't it?